I made an error there. I apologize for that in advance, that we don't have any new members to announce at this time. We are working on filling the public member seat, and I neglected to take that out of the agenda, so I apologize for that. So if folks would like to introduce themselves, we've got a few folks on. I'll call the names that I can see here, and we'll go from there. And then the speakers will introduce them when they come up to their speaking time. Stephanie.
Hi, Stephanie Page, Oregon Department of Agriculture.
Christy.
Hi, Christy Caldwell with the Cafo program.
Tammy.
Phone. Tammy Kerr, Oregon Dairy Farmers Association. Good afternoon.
Thanks, Tammy. Good afternoon. Carol.
Hi, Carol Lorenzen, Oregon State University.
All right, Shannon.
Hi, Shannon Hona, FDA.
Hi, welcome. We have a caller. Just all I see is a caller number 1. All right, how about Jennifer? Jennifer, we can't hear you. Still no sound from you, Jennifer. I think you must be double muted, maybe. We'll move to Troy.
Hi, I'm Troy Downing with Oregon State University, Dairy Extension Specialist.
Hey, good afternoon, Troy. Dan?
Dan Luthold, dairy farmer in Tillamook.
Hey, good afternoon, Dan. Austin?
Hi, I'm Austin Piccone. I'm from Wallow and Root Farm, and I'm here as a representative from the swine industry.
All right, thanks, Austin. Hey, Nick?
Hey, afternoon, Wim and everyone. My name is Nick Peak, and I'm the Regional Agriculture Advisor for EPA Region 10.
All right, David.
David May with Valley Fresh Food Skyline Farms. We're chickens for eggs.
All right, and Mike.
Hey, Wim. Mike Freeze, representing 3 Mile Canyon Farms.
All right, well, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks so much for participating. We do record these meetings, and the minutes are posted digitally on our website after the meetings. And so I don't know if folks had a chance to review last meeting in July and had any comments, questions, additions, or deletions for the minutes. All right, so I'm not hearing any. If you do come upon something, just let me know. We'll let the minutes stand as they are recorded. We also have a presentation today. This project is funded by the Dairy Farmers Association as well as the Cafo program, and there are some other funding sources that Elsie will explain. And the project's located at the OSU Dairy, which is one of our Cafos. So Elsie, if you want to introduce yourself and then start off with your presentation, that would be great.
Sure. Hello, everybody. And I am seeing that my camera is not on. This is a new platform for me. So if anyone has any tips for turning my camera on.
Are you using the microphone on your computer?
Yes.
Yeah, the camera should go along with that. There's a Down at the bottom of the screen, there are icons for mic and camera screen.
Yeah, actually, well, actually, why don't I just jump on? I'll just jump in and share my presentation. Okay, so I'm getting a, okay, looks like
So
that's,
Janet will have to give you permission. So Janet, can you give Elsie permission to share her screen?
I just made her presenter.
dang it, I did it again. So let me get set up here. All right, gee, I'm sorry, my apologies. That's a very disorganized beginning. So yeah, my name is Elsie Weishar, and I'm happy to be here to share some of the work I've been doing with a denitrifying wood chip bioreactor here at OSU. And during the course of this presentation, I will briefly touch on the motivation for this research, and I'll provide an overview of denitrifying wood chip bioreactors. I'll go over some specifics of our unit installation and some of the methods that we used for data collection. And then I'll present results for our first 2 years of operation. And then I'll wrap up with some of our current and future research questions that we'd like to look into.
Hey, Elsie, I'm going to interrupt you because we're not seeing anything on your screen.
Oh, okay.
Down at the bottom of the GoToMeeting, there's a mic icon, a camera icon, and a screen icon. So you have to click on the screen.
Right, I did that, but let me try it again. Let me try.
Janet, does it look good on your end?
I made her presenter.
Okay, are you seeing anything now?
Yes.
Yes, now there we go.
Okay, I don't know, maybe I didn't click enough times. So let me see if I can get my screen here a little cleared up so I can see what I'm doing. So anyway, okay, so I had.
We're seeing 2 slides. So the current slide and the next slide. So I don't know if you can go into like.
So it's showing, okay, I will just back out.
You might be able to select that display settings on it, if that helps.
In the GoToMeeting screen?
No, I'm thinking if you go to the bottom and then view the slideshow again, it's the far right
Yeah,
one.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna do. I had it in presenter setting on my screen, and maybe that's where the complication is coming in. Okay, so here,
there.
Just one screen there? Okay.
Perfect.
All right. So
Thank
here,
you.
so yeah, let me gather my thoughts again. So again, just for the overview of what I plan to talk about, the motivation for the research, I'll go over denitrifying wood chip bioreactors a little bit, and then provide some of the specifics for our unit installation and the methods we used for data collection. And then I'll go over some of the results we have for the first 2 seasons of operation, and then I'll finish up with some of our questions for further research. But before I start in, I do want to acknowledge a really important funding that we've received for this project. The Oregon Dairy Farmers Association provided the bulk of the funding for our unit installation, and the Oregon Department of Agriculture and the OSU Agricultural Research Fund both provided really important support for our research activities, and that is all very much appreciated. Thank you very much to those of you who are here related to that. So to begin, just to sort of create a common base of understanding, the problem that we're addressing here is that of excess nutrients in our water resources. As we know, over the past 100 years, we've had increasing amounts of nutrients getting into our waterways, resulting in problems such as eutrophication, anoxic zones, and toxic algae blooms. We also know that agricultural activities can contribute a significant amount of nutrients to our waterways. And over the past decade or so, denitrifying wood chip bioreactors have been studied as a potential edge of field method of reducing nitrogen pollution in agricultural runoff. So what's denitrification? Denitrification is the stepwise reduction of nitrate down to dinitrogen gas. Each step is accomplished by bacterial enzymes produced by different groups of bacteria. And if we look at a conceptualization of a denitrifying wood chip bioreactor, the functional concept behind it is that agricultural drainage is channeled through a bed of wood chips, and the chips become a growth medium for bacteria and other microorganisms, which then utilize the nitrogen compounds in the runoff and ultimately convert it back to dinitrogen gas. If we dig in a little closer, what we would find is that the bacteria and other microorganisms will colonize the wood chips and actually build up a biofilm. And as the wood chips degrade, they provide a carbon source for the organisms, which will then utilize the nitrogen compounds in the flow going by for their energy and growth processes. However, as the nitrogen compounds are consumed, the water chemistry will change, and so it becomes useful to think about the environmental redox ladder, which is simply a conceptualization of how easy or hard it is for organisms to extract energy from the compounds in their environment. As a general rule, it's easiest for organisms to extract energy from oxygen. But once oxygen is used, the next easiest would be nitrogen compounds, and then manganese and iron and so on down to the bottom where we have carbon and hydrogen. Each step down the ladder, it becomes progressively more difficult to extract energy, and the organisms that utilize those compounds have developed special tools to help catalyze the necessary reactions. The term redox refers to oxidation reduction potential, and it's basically a measure of where local conditions are in terms of this ladder. Conditions at the top are oxidative, and conditions going toward the bottom become more reducing. So the reason I went through that whole explanation is to help this figure make a little bit more sense. This figure is a conceptualization of what we expect to be happening in a wood chip bioreactor. If we look at the flow coming in on the left and leaving on the right, any oxygen in the flow is going to be quickly utilized, and then nitrogen utilizing organisms will take over and will start to consume the nitrate. As the nitrate is consumed, we would expect to see an increase of nitrite, because that's the next step of the denitrification chain, but then nitrite utilizers will kick in and start to consume that as well. And this continues on stepwise through the denitrification chain with nitric oxide, nitrous oxide, and ultimately to dinitrogen gas. At this point, it becomes an optimization problem. The optimal stopping point for the reaction is after the nitrogen has been completely converted to dinitrogen gas, but before conditions become reducing enough to produce compounds such as hydrogen sulfide or methane, which are both undesirable byproducts. However, if we stop the reaction too soon, we could also run into the problem of producing nitric and nitrous oxide, which are both powerful greenhouse gases and also an undesirable product. Since the idea for these units are for them to not require intensive management, the primary knob for designing these systems is to size the unit appropriately for a certain expected flow rate. So to provide a sense of scale, I've provided this photo here. This is a full field scale size unit installed in Iowa. And much of the research into these units has been done in the US Midwest, which has quite a different climate than what we get here in Western Oregon. Here, we get the majority of our runoff during the cold, wet winter season. So operating conditions could be quite different. To look into the question of how well these types of units would work here in our climate, we installed a denitrifying wood chip bioreactor here at OSU, as Wim explained, at the OSU dairy farm. And it's set up to treat the drainage coming off of a tile system that drains approximately 40 acres of forage field that's used for both forage harvest and rotational grazing. The soils in this area are silt loam and clay soils, and liquid manure is spread seasonally as the weather conditions permit. The NRCS has developed guidelines for these types of systems based on the research from the Midwest. We did not specifically follow their guidelines, but we used most of the same references. So we did hit their recommended design points. Our system is designed to treat a minimum of 15 to 20% of an estimated peak flow from the tile system, and to provide a 10 to 24 hour hydraulic retention time capacity at the peak flow capacity. The unit is 60 foot long by 12 foot wide, which is a 5:1 aspect ratio, and it is plastic lined, both the bottom and sides, to prevent mixing with any sort of soil moisture in the surrounding area. We used 2 Agridane water control structures at the inlet and outlet so that we could have a high flow bypass system. And the main chip pit is filled with 1-inch mixed hardwood chips just from a local supplier. You can also see from the photo that we installed PVC wells so that we could pull water samples and take internal water chemistry measurements. And because we needed the frameworks for the PVC wells, we also installed some plywood flow baffles to prevent the development of preferential flow paths through the chips. So for just a few construction photos, this shows the excavation of the main chip pit and the inlet plumbing bay in the foreground. The key thing here is the high flow bypass line that goes through the bottom left, of the chip pit. After that was installed, we lined the pit with plastic and then put the chips in. The center photo shows the inlet plumbing. The square box is the AgriDrain flow control box. It has stop logs inside to help manage flow rates. And then close to the AgriDrain box is a riser that we use for salt tracers and dosing, nutrient pulses, any other thing, test material we think we might want to send through the bioreactor. In the close foreground is a riser that we installed just for some clean out access if we should need it. The photo on the right shows the 6-inch perforated AgriDrain pipe that we used for the inlet, both the inlet diffuser and the outlet collector, both of which are stabilized with the 1.5-inch round rock as shown here. Once the chips were in, we put down a layer of woven road cloth and then backfilled with soil to ground level to provide a soil cap. The reason for the woven road cloth is to permit gas exchange between the bioreactor and the soil cap. And our plans are to seed the cap back to grass once the soil has finished settling. For data collection, we did a few different things. Probably the most important for this part of the project were the daily samples that were collected using automatic ISCO water samplers. And those samples were collected weekly and taken back to the lab for testing for nitrate, nitrite, and ammonium. And sorry, I was trying to, my mental blank there. There was something else I was going to say about that, but I'll just move on. We would also periodically pull samples from the PVC wells, and those would also be tested for the same components. When we were drawing samples from the PVC wells, we would also use a YSI multi-parameter meter This allowed us to test for take measurements of things like dissolved oxygen, pH, redox potential, that sort of thing. And so for some results for the first 2 seasons of operation, a little bit more context. This unit is primarily driven by precipitation. So I included these plots of the head measured at the inlet and outlet, just to show that once the soils were saturated, we actually had a situation where we had pretty much semi-steady state with respect to flow. This was actually useful. It allowed us to have a little bit more control over some flow rates through the bioreactor. The first year, I left the stop logs in the inlet control box at the maximum height. I just left it the same all season long. But then for the second season, the plot on the right, I changed it periodically to change the flow conditions through the bioreactor. So for our nitrogen concentrations, this plot shows inlet and outlet nitrate concentrations. I set these plots against the precipitation record because we do see that there is some relationship. When we got heavy rains, we did tend to see some spikes in concentrations coming into the bioreactor. This makes sense because nitrate is very transferable by water, transportable by water. So it would make sense that when we get a rain pulse that we would get some concentration increases. However, the interesting thing to note from the concentration plots is that after a period of startup and adaptation, about around mid-January of 2020, we started to see significant consistent results, almost down to baseline in many cases, between the inlet and outlet concentrations. And that continued through the 2020 season and right into when things started up again in December of 2020, at the beginning of the 2021 winter season. That continued until the end of January, when I changed one of the stop logs to change the flow rate. And once that happened, we see about, I'm trying to remember, 14 to 18 days of, looks like, adaptation, at which point reductions, consistent reductions start up again, but at a much slower percentage. And that is pretty much how the season finished out this last year. This plot shows nitrate concentrations below the nitrate concentrations that we showed in the previous slide. And you notice that the concentrations are much smaller. They do tend to follow the nitrate concentrations in that if there is a nitrite spike, it usually is following a nitrate spike, following a similar pattern. And then this plot shows that these plots show our ammonia concentrations, also much smaller than the nitrate. Although we do tend to see a seasonal increase toward the end of the winter and moving on into spring. The key thing to look at for these plots is that we do tend to see some ammonia reductions, especially in the 2021 season. This is unexpected because our assumption is that the internal conditions of the bioreactor are inherently anaerobic, and so they would not be conducive to ammonia oxidation. So this is an interesting question for us to take a look at to see what might be going on with that. It'd be really cool if we can design a system that can do both the ammonia oxidation and the denitrification phases of nitrogen treatment. So to do some performance analysis, I selected 4 date sets. The first set was the winter of 2020, and then the second set, the winter of 2021. Those were basically operated with the stop logs at maximum height, so relatively long hydraulic retention times. And then 2 sets in February and March of 2021, which were operated at a faster hydraulic retention time. And so this is just a summary of some of the information and calculations I did. What we see is that over the 4 date sets, we had an average flow rate I calculated it both in cubic meters per day and gallons per minute. So just figuring gallons per minute might be easier or more comfortable for people. The range was 15 to 36 gallons per minute. And then the hydraulic retention time for those date sets range between 15 and 60 hours. So that gives us a nice range of conditions to look at. The inlet and outlet nitrate concentrations are interesting. While the inlet concentrations may not seem all that impressive, I mean, 20 to 30 milligrams per liter is high, but it's not as high as some of the peaks we saw. If you look at the inlet nitrate concentration range, you know, we're looking at 80, 90, and 100 milligrams per liter at some points. But the interesting thing to me is that the outlet concentration, the average outlet concentration is pretty much less than 10 milligrams per liter for most of the date sets. If we go down and look at the amount of total nitrogen removed in grams per day, we find that sets 2 through 4 are pretty similar in size of the amount of nitrogen that has been removed, although the percentage of removal from the flow going through the bioreactor can be quite different. And in fact, if we look at set 3, that has the shortest hydraulic retention time, but it had the maximum amount of total nitrogen removed per day, but also the smallest percentage of the flow treated, of the load treated. We can look at this in another way. In this plot, what I've done, I've got the total nitrogen information that I had in the table in the big plot on the right, and on the left, those values are broken out into components for nitrate, nitrite, and ammonium. And then they're also organized by hydraulic retention time, going from the shortest to the longest. And what we can see here is that, again, looking at the big plot on the right, the magnitude of the nitrogen removed is similar over the various hydraulic retention times. But the key thing to note is that over on the left, looking at the nitrite plot, the one in the middle, we actually see some nitrite production between the inlet and outlet. And while the magnitude is small, the key thing here is that this might be an indicator that we're getting some incomplete denitrification. So that's a key thing that we need to look into as well. If we want to take a look at what's going on inside the bioreactor, this is what we see. And there's a lot of stuff on here, but I'll walk you through. I don't see any sort of a pointer tool, so I'll have to just talk you through it. Basically, what we have is on the left with the average values in blue, those are nitrogen concentrations. The top left is nitrate, top left is nitrate, the bottom left is nitrite, and then ammonia is just above the photo. And then the plots on the right are from our YSI multi-parameter data. So we have dissolved oxygen in the top left in red and redox potential below that. And then the two plots on the right are different ways of looking at pH. On the x-axis, this reflects the longitudinal position in the bioreactor, with 0 corresponding to the inlet and 6 corresponding to the outlet. And then each position in between corresponds to one of the rows of wells. So position 1 is the first row of wells, position 2 is the second, and so on and so forth down the bioreactor. So on this slide, I'm showing data from the set that has a 34-hour hydraulic retention time, one of the longer ones. And what we see is that nitrate and nitrite are reduced pretty much to baseline within the first 10 feet of the bioreactor. And we don't see any real pattern of reduction for the ammonia. But to compare, if we look at data for a 15-hour hydraulic retention time, which is the fastest one, then we see things change around a little bit. We don't really see a clear pattern of nitrate reduction, But in the nitrite plot in the bottom left, we see a really clear peak occurring at about well 4. In addition, for the ammonia plot, we see ammonia being reduced within the first 10 feet of the bioreactor. And what's interesting to go along with that is if we look across at the YSI data, the dissolved oxygen plot and the top left of the red plots, we actually have oxygen persisting in the system down to about well 3. So it looks like we're getting some ammonia oxidation in the first 10 feet of the bioreactor, which would be a really interesting result. So the findings that we can take away from this work so far are that denitrifying wood chip bioreactors can work in a Mediterranean climate like what we have here in Corvallis, providing good reductions in nitrate concentrations even during the cold winter runoff season. And it looks like a hydraulic retention time of 15 to 30 hours appears to provide good nitrate reductions. However, it should be noted this is longer than the 10-hour minimum hydraulic retention time recommended by the NRCS. And there is some indication that incomplete denitrification may be occurring at some of the shorter hydraulic retention times. And then one caveat to keep in mind for these units is that it's known that early years of operation will oftentimes show better performance because the fresh chips have a higher level of readily available carbon. And so that raises the question of what we can expect for quote unquote normal performance as the chips age. Some of the research questions we're looking at, we're going to try to look at the gaseous elements of the system and to look more closely at whether complete denitrification is occurring. And then that other question about the ammonium reductions, those were unexpected. And so doing a little bit of work to confirm whether or not we're getting ammonium oxidation. There are a couple of anaerobic paths that could be going on, and we need to check that out and see if we can make sure we know what's going on there. The other big question is because in our climate, these systems would be run mostly by rainfall. That gives us very little control of when the flow is going to come or when it isn't. And when the rain stops, the flow is going to slow down, which is going to create a longer hydraulic retention time, whether we want it or not. And so we need to look and see whether or not we're getting some pollution swapping with, for example, hydrogen sulfide or methane at those longer hydraulic retention times during the cold season. We have also done some work looking at whether or not these units can remove fecal coliforms. There is some evidence in the literature that that might be possible. We did a pilot study, but our pilot study was pretty inconclusive, so we're planning on doing more work on that. And then we're also looking at using some genomic analysis to look more deeply at how the microbial colonies are developing at various locations within the bioreactor. So I think those are lots of interesting questions, and it's going to be interesting to find out how usable these units might be here in our climate. And I hope that you guys find it as interesting as I do. And with that, that's the finish of my prepared remarks, and I'm happy to take any questions that there might be.
All right, well, thank you so much, Elsie. And I can't remember as your talk started, if you talked about the fact that the engineering study of the nitrogen cycle was kind of one of the top 10 challenges for the engineering world here in the coming years.
No, you're right. I did forget that in the my confusion over trying to get the app to work right. I did forget that. Yeah, the National Academy for Engineering actually in 2017 named managing the nitrogen cycle as one of the great engineering challenges for the 21st century. So that puts a little bit of impetus into this sort of research, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for bringing that that around again. And then the other thing, I always forget what percentage the atmosphere is of N2 dinitrogen gas. It's either 72% or 78 or 76, somewhere in there, I believe. I don't know if you have a number you can
Yeah,
attach to that.
actually, I don't have that fresh in my mind, but 72 also rings a bell, but it is the primary constituent of our atmosphere. So, yeah, it's always interesting to remember that, right? We're oxygen
Exactly.
breathers. We're oxygen breathers, but our atmosphere is mostly nitrogen.
Yeah. And it starts to look like this system is the reverse of the Haber-Bush process, which, which takes dinitrogen gas from the atmosphere and turns it into anhydrous ammonia.
Right.
This is really taking those nitrogen compounds from the landscape and turning them back into gas and restoring them back to the atmosphere. So it's a lot, in my mind, like the water cycle is kind of how it works in my brain anyway.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We're trying to tap into that natural nitrogen cycle. And basically what, the organisms do this naturally in the environment. It's just, it's a pretty slow rate. It's at a rate that we're putting into it. In other words, what we're taking out of the atmosphere and applying to the landscape is much faster than what the natural environment can take out. And so what we're trying to do is co-opt or provide a place where these bacteria can work more efficiently.
All right, I'll throw it open to the group. Any questions for Elsie? And Elsie, if you could stop sharing your screen, if you go down to the button on the bottom and stop sharing, that'll bring your picture up.
Okay. I am sorry. I apologize for being so inept with this.
No worries.
I've got to get the GoToMeeting screen to come back in full. Oh, actually, there it is. Okay. Oh wait, no, I don't want to leave the meeting. I just want to stop sharing. There we go.
Yeah, perfect.
Is that it? Okay. Sorry. Every platform, you basically have to relearn.
Exactly. All right, any questions for Elsie?
I had one question. I guess I'm curious if you guys had any or looked into it all, like the question of what maintaining a system like that would look like. You mentioned the reduction of available carbon in the wood chips. So I would imagine at a certain point, like the wood chips would have to be replaced. And would that process entail like a pretty big sort of, like you have to pull up the like road cloth and the the soil that you had planted on top, replace the wood chips, and any kind of estimation around how frequently that might have to be done in order to maintain like an efficient process within the system?
Yeah, so these systems are actually designed to last 10 to 15 years. The goal is to make it as simple as possible so producers can just set it in and then only have to check on it for flow conditions every now and again. There are some bioreactors. I'm trying to think, I can't remember what the longest one that's been running, but certainly up in the 17 to 20 years. It is true that as the time goes on, the chips are going to degrade. And so that's one of the questions of how long can you run it and still get reasonable amounts of nitrogen reduction. And so different people are starting to actually dig up some chips and sort of do some evaluation of how much available carbon is left. But that's like current research. These units, the earliest of these units have been installed around 2010. So they're just starting to come to the end of their projected lifespan. So that's kind of current research at the moment.
Interesting. Are you aware of any research happening anywhere, like either in the Midwest or anywhere else, with other like carbon sources as opposed to wood chips or any other kind of media like that?
Oh yeah. Early on, there was quite a bit of research into looking at, for example, using corn cobs or straw or shredded newspapers, and it all comes back. At least what the conclusion has come back at. You can get higher amounts of nitrogen reduction with sources that have more readily available carbon, but they don't tend to last as long. So you would run into having to replace them more frequently, right? And so conceptually, for the idea behind these being something that farmers might actually want to do, it seems to have sort of settled back on the wood chips. They've even looked at shredded landscape material, but then again, it just, the finer it is, the more quickly it degrades, and so you end up having to replace it more frequently.
Okay, interesting.
Optimization, right?
Yeah, for sure. Interesting. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm wondering, something along the lines of a pellet stove, Elfie, where you would basically, because remember, in a farm operation, in a production setting, you wouldn't have the monitoring wells in there, so you wouldn't have that stuff in the way, if you will.
Right.
And could somebody put an auger in there, install, and every 10 years or so, you would just auger in a load of wood chips kind of on the top of it. You wouldn't have to tear it up, and would the cost of the auger be more or less than the removing all the stuff and excavating all the old chips, or do you have to excavate the old ones? Could you just leave them there and add new on every so often?
Yeah, these are all interesting. I don't know that we haven't gotten to the point, or our experience has gotten to the point where we have the information to optimize replacement, right? But I would sort of imagine, given the size of the pit, and if, ours is 60 foot by 12, and so for a bigger unit, it would be even bigger than that. It might almost be easier just to design some sort of easy, whether or not, off the top of my head, lay plywood down over the top and put the soil on top of that, so that you just excavate the foot or so off the top, scrape that off, pull the plywood up, and then you can get at the chips with whatever excavation equipment you have to pull it out, or one of those big vacuum trucks, or whatever the case may be. I'm sure that we will, if we can get these to be implemented more, I'm sure that producers will tell us the easiest way to, they'll probably be able to figure that out, I should think. But yeah, it's a question that hasn't been explored much yet, just because we're not quite at that point in the life cycle of most of the experimental units.
All right, any other questions, comments?
I just want to say thank you very much on behalf of the Oregon Dairy Farmers Association. Really interesting, and thank you for your time and your passion. It's much appreciated.
Oh, well, thank you for the support. Without you guys, it would not have gotten into the ground. So that was very critical support for us. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and we look forward to to future work too, and see how that unfolds. What size is optimal, and can we get some company to kind of pre-build them? That was another thought that we discussed, was to have them built, much like a septic tank. So the farmer would excavate the hole and then just drop the unit in. It would already be pre-filled with chips and already set up, and then cover it back up.
Yeah, I think there's lots of interesting questions of how to optimize these for our climate, to size them to get the reductions we want without running into the danger of the excessively reducing conditions. Yeah, so there's things, I think, sorry, my mind is going 100 miles a minute, lots of ideas percolating on how we might do that. So lots of work to do.
Yep. The other thing I appreciated about this work too is that it wasn't limited just to Cafo sites. It's really applicable to ag sites. I mean, any ag site that's tile drained that has these constituents in their drain water, it would be applicable to.
Absolutely. That's actually a really important point because the majority of this work in the Midwest has been done with crop systems, mostly corn, right? And much of their flow, in the Midwest with their climate, a lot of their flow, their runoff comes from the summer thunderstorms, but then also irrigation, right? So they can be applied to quite different agricultural regimes. And in fact, actually, Tammy, back to you. I think this is one of the first units where it's been specifically studied for a dairy system. So yeah, a good exploration of the technology in that context. It makes me wonder if this could have helped. What's that big dairy, the mega dairy that has been having so much trouble in the Columbia River, right? Makes me wonder if this could have helped them out a little bit.
Well, yeah, so the the groundwater management areas, there are 3 of those in the state. That's where that large dairy is located, and they were all set up because of nitrate in groundwater. Mm-hmm. So anything that reduces nitrate is a good thing.
Right. Absolutely.
All right, one final call out for questions. All right, well, thanks so much, Elsie. Really appreciate your time and being with us this afternoon, and look forward to continuing work from you and Frank. And Elsie's with the Bioresource Engineering Group at OSU. So this is putting an engineering solution to an agronomic problem.
Yep. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You're welcome to join us the rest of the day. All right, so we're a little bit ahead of schedule, and we'll go ahead and move on to our next item, which is talking about the Npds Cafo general permit that we have that is currently in public comment. So we have a hearing scheduled for that for next Monday, the 18th in the afternoon. And the comment period will run then through the end of that week and into the first of next week. Both ODA and DEQ will participate in the hearing. And we're also going to have the presentation and the question and answer informational period delivered both in English and in Spanish during that hearing. So we expect to get a lot of comments on that, and the process will be that the agencies will then need to go through the comments and prepare responses to those, and then see how the agencies, what we would do with the permit. So the options are: we could issue it as we noticed it, we could make changes to it based on comments we received, or we could essentially deny it, not issue it at all, and go back to the drawing board. I would mention, and I think Nick is going to touch on this a little bit, that both of our neighboring states, Washington and Idaho, well, right now Idaho does not have any permit because it wasn't remanded. It was basically just taken away in its entirety on the Idaho permit, and so Nick's going to talk a little bit about that. And the Washington Cafo Npds general permit, they're working on basically trying to figure out how to rewrite that and put that back out to public notice again. So all of the states right now in the Northwest region here are doing work on Cafo Npds general permits. I think that's all I had on the fact that it's out in comment. Like I said, the agency accepts comments, verbally at the hearing or in written form, snail mailed, emailed, or faxed to us. And all of the contact information should be available on our website under that general permit public notice. So didn't know if anybody had comments on that or questions regarding that.
Wim, I have a question, if I could.
Sure.
As I look at, I'm still kind of confused as as to why we have substantial and non-substantial changes. Can you help me understand the designation difference there?
Sure. So what Troy's referring to is in the permit, the nutrient management plan, which that's new nomenclature that we're going to start using, replaces the animal waste management plan nomenclature. But in the nutrient management plan, there are changes that a permittee could make that are defined as substantial changes to that plan, and there are ones that are defined as not substantial. And the substantial changes that we listed in the permit need to go to public notice because they changed the registrant's activities in such a way that the Clean Water Act says that those things need to be noticed to the public. So the genesis of substantial and non-substantial change to the plan actually comes to us in the Clean Water Act and the Cafo rules. And it essentially says that you have to define in those plans, because the nutrient management plan in a Cafo permit is defined as the effluent limit for that permittee. So it's if in a sewage treatment plant, it has an effluent limit that's numeric that basically says it can discharge 10 million gallons of effluent a day into the receiving water. And in those discharged 10 million gallons, it can have so many units of nitrogen, so many units of phosphorus, so many units of bacteria, so many, a pH range of X to Y. And if that discharger wants to change those limits, they have to take that permit back to public notice because they're changing what they're discharging. And that's the same reason that a nutrient management plan, if a substantial change occurs there, where a Cafo is land applying, is one of the things that we have to notice if they add new land. And so that's just part of their utilization system that wasn't in their old plan. So again, sorry for the long answer, Troy, but the genesis is Clean Water Act, and we're required to define those in the permit.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure. The one other thing I would mention about the permit itself is again, this is Clean Water Act requirement. So once the general permit is issued, and what's available for comment right now, or what we're soliciting the public to comment on, is just the permit itself. This comment period does not, we're not taking comments on individual registrants to the permit either in the past or in the future. But there will be an opportunity for the public to comment on individual registrations, and that will happen, once the agency is able to get a general permit on the ground. Then we are required to notice all of the registrants that are administratively extended on the old permit that want to move to this new permit, and then anybody new that comes along for an NPDS permit registration, we publicly notice those. The way we've done that in the past is we've done that by our Cafo inspection area. So we would start with area 1, which is Tillamook County, notice the 90 some odd permits that are there, those registrants, and then the public would be able to comment on either all of them together or individual registrations and nutrient management plans during those comment periods. And so there would be 6 of those comment periods that correspond with each of those inspection areas that we have. And that will generally takes about a 12-month period after the general permit is put together to go through all those renewals.
Can I ask a question about that?
Sure.
How much time would be given to do those kinds of comments if it was, say, commenting on 90 different permits, either as a group or individually? Will it be more than the standard time period? Because 30 days or 35 days is really short for that.
So typically the way we've set that up is with a 35-day comment period. I'm trying to remember in my time with ODA if we've ever had, we've had people make comments on individual facilities, or one or two or three facilities. I don't know that we've ever had anybody make comments on all of the registrants in a batch process like that. So I think it would depend on, what the circumstance was, and would the agency consider a longer period of time. There's multiple sizes of facilities and animal species registered to the permit in all these different areas. And I mean, folks are welcome to comment on every single registration. Each plan is going to be unique only to that registrant.
Can I follow up on that really quick?
Sure.
Other than the nutrient management plans, what else, if anything, would ODA be posting on its website for those comments? Because sometimes, of course, the file before what was the compliance under the past general permit is really relevant to looking at an individual facility. And so rather than having to do, public records requests, or, would ODA potentially post things from a public records request that someone has done so everyone can see it, just something that would make that 35 days be more doable?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Amy. And I'm not sure what the response would be. I think typically, and I'm kind of going from memory here a bit, but the things that we post would be the name of the facility, the location of it, it's the animal species that are covered under the permit, and the size of it. I don't recall that we have in the past posted compliance history on an individual basis, but Stephanie, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I was just gonna echo what you were saying, Wim, which is I think we need to think about that a little bit. It's a good question, Amy. I think we're always trying to balance transparency with, not overwhelming folks with information, and just balancing that with the practical approach that we take to working with the permitted facilities. So I think we will commit to figuring that out and getting back to you before we go to comment on those batch registrations.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And I would just clarify, I think, one way that could be easier to do it is if one person does a public records request for a facility after they notice that it's, trying to get under the reissued general permit, then that could just be posted publicly once it's divulged to, one person. Like, the federal agencies do this frequently with posting. Just someone asked for this FOIA, and now we're going to put that information on the website. So go look through that before you ask us for it, just to make it easier.
Okay, yeah, I'll definitely take that into consideration. Any other questions, comments on general permit process? All right, not hearing any. We'll move to the next item, which is discussion of some new Cafo administrative processes that the agency is undertaking in partnership with DEQ and other agencies that we work with. And so Stephanie and I are gonna tag team on this. Essentially, a lot of this conversation came from work that we did with DEQ on developing a new Cafo MOU that was signed here a few months ago. And that MOU contains additional touch points for our two agencies, specifically when we get a new permit, essentially any new individual permit application that we get anywhere in the state, we share it with DEQ within a certain number of days after we receive it, because both of the agencies have to develop that permit jointly. And so we added that into the MOU. We also added a touch point where when ODA proposes to issue a penalty for a surface water discharge that a Cafo may have experienced, that if we get to a penalty phase, the DEQ would, their Office of Compliance and Enforcement would review the penalty prior to us issuing it. And so we've had one that we've run through that loop so far, and that's been working fine. other things will be in this proposed general permit and in the MOU and in our fee schedule. We define a large tier 1 and tier 2 CAFO. So we took the old large category and divided it up into 2 categories now. And so if any CAFO makes any change that will make them a tier 2, so any CAFO that's not existing as a tier 2 makes a change so they become one, that will be public noticed, and we also share that information as we're reviewing the plan prior to notice to with DEQ. So that's a little bit of the flavor of some of the things that we've been working on. And then Stephanie, do you want to talk about some of the other coordinational things we've been doing with other agencies on application work?
Yep, thanks, Wim. Yeah, just some other things we've been working on and a little bit of background on why. I think we've seen over the years that there's a growing expectation, and I think it's a very reasonable expectation for state agencies to coordinate closely with each other. So that means that if a facility gets some sort of permit or a license from ODA, that we coordinate with other agencies to make sure that, for example, the facility's got water rights to support the type of a facility they're operating, that we're not issuing a permit for somebody to locate a facility in a wetland that would be running afoul of Department of State lands requirements, for example. And so that's the type of coordination that we've been trying to do. I think we're still kind of figuring out the details of the process, and to be honest with everybody, it's caused a couple of permitting activities to get slowed down. But our thought at the same time is that if we work with folks to make sure that they are at least in the process of getting those other authorizations that they need before we issue the CAFO permit, and before we even go to notice, make sure that they've at least applied, that it's going to make the rest of the process go more smoothly and quickly. And I think it gives concerned citizens greater confidence in how we're doing our process, and hopefully bring up less concerns if they know that we're checking on those kinds of things. So that is just a little bit of background about the interagency coordination piece. And then we're also, I think, seeing a greater level of media interest in some types of proposed program actions that might have not generated a lot of interest even a few years ago. Facilities expanding, for example, in areas of the state where we have a pretty small population or have, a predominance of livestock operations. We're starting to see greater interest in some of those proposals. And so we've tried to spend a little more time before we go to notice on those different types of actions, working with our communications team to develop a communications plan. And that just means that our communications team, before we go to comment, knows some of the questions they might get from media about those types of facilities and has some answers. So again, I think ultimately it helps applicants if we get a media call, if our communications team is able to answer questions that media have, and it just helps the process go more smoothly. But we are trying to build more time into some of the steps of our process to give a little chance for our comms team to develop those types of plans. So just wanted to mention that we're doing both of those things. And I think it's an improvement to our process. It helps us respond to inquiries accurately and timely. But I think as we learn how to do it right and how to build in those steps, I think it has in the past slowed a couple of things down. I think we've gotten to the point where we've built it into our timeframes, and it'll go more smoothly going forward. But I think that's everything that I was going to add about that. So Wim, back to you.
All right, thanks, Stephanie. So yeah, another example that I can give on the interagency coordination. Well, if so DEQ has a requirement for what's called a construction stormwater permit. So anytime a facility, regardless of where they're located in the state and really regardless of what they are, anytime somebody's doing construction on more than an acre of land at one time, so they're going to do dirt work on more than an acre of land, they need to apply to DEQ for a 1200C construction stormwater permit. DEQ may not issue one, but they do need to apply, and then DEQ looks at the specifics of the proposal and decides, you know, depending on where the facility is located in the state, the season of construction, and what they're proposing, do they need that permit or not? And so that's one of the things we've added to our checklist, that, you know, is the site larger than an acre where the construction will occur? If it is, then we're talking to the applicant about making sure you touch base with DEQ region for a 1200C stormwater permit and start that conversation with them. Say, they may not require that permit in every case, but they do need to check the box that they've asked for it. And again, we don't have authority to regulate that, but it's a coordinational activity between DEQ there in another branch of DEQ.
I'm glad you mentioned checklist, Wim, because I think that's kind of something on our to-do list, is having a checklist to share with prospective applicants. Because I think if you're thinking from an applicant perspective, they might be wondering, well, how are we supposed to know that we should have all this stuff in the pipeline when we submit an application to ODA? And so I think that's something that our stakeholders have asked us to create. And so it's on our collective to-do list. So I think folks probably know too, we do have a vacant position in the program right now. And so just a little bit reduced on capacity for those types of special projects, but it is something that that's on our radar to work on.
Yeah, absolutely. Christy reminded me before the meeting and shared with me our draft checklist that we are working on. So we'll develop them for our internal works and workflow so that we can keep that moving. And then also, once we get them perfected, then we'll share them with this group and make them available to applicants. So ultimately, we'd post them on the website, so it would be part of the application. And then our application, I mean, since we're all, for the last 20 years anyway, ever since I've been here, in the permit or in our application material, it says, you know, that you need to allow 180 days prior to operation after you submit a complete application package to ODA. And so I think, you know, some people forget about that, but the complete package is an approvable AWMP, the fees for whatever size permit they're applying for, a complete and accurate application, and a land use compatibility statement. And so at that point, once we get those completed 4 items, then we'd start the 180-day clock. And I think for many of them, we're able to do that in less than 180 days. But that, you know, we need to make sure people understand that expectation if they're starting with a brand new facility. All right. Any other questions on permitting? All right, not hearing any. Nick, are you on? And can you give us some updates on Npds permit status and other things, EPA?
Yeah, sure, Wim. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, loud and clear.
Okay, I've got several things to touch on. So hopefully I won't go over time here, but you mentioned earlier the statuses of Npds Cafo general permits in other states. And so I'm going to touch on Washington first very briefly. So Washington had a permit that's been in effect for several years now, and it was appealed, and the Washington State Court of Appeals issued their decision on that permit on June 29th, 2021, so this summer. And the court affirmed in part and reversed in part the decisions on that permit by the Pollution Control Hearing Board, and that occurred in October 2018. So this has been an ongoing litigative process for a while. And so Ecology, who's the permitting authority in the state of Washington, is revising their draft permit that's supposed to be issued in the future to be consistent with that court's opinion. And so some of the key issues that were in the appeal were Early spring land application restrictions based on an air temperature threshold referred to as TSUM 200, and the lack of groundwater monitoring requirements. The permit required soil sampling requirements in the spring and fall, but did not require groundwater monitoring requirements. Ecology has held listening sessions in the past for their upcoming draft permit. They're holding more listening sessions actually this week. They held a listening section for the general public on the 12th in the morning. And I think at 5 p.m. today, they're having another informal listening session to take public comment on incorporating the court's opinions into their upcoming permits. So some of the changes they're trying to consider include clarifying the requirements for repairing liquid manure lagoons and composting solid materials, requiring monitoring of surface water and groundwater, revising the public review process for nutrient management plans, and clarifying land application requirements on very high-risk fields. So the timeline for this new draft permit, Ecology expects by late spring 2022 to publish a draft permit or draft permits. They have a state permit and a Npds permit as well. And then after a formal public comment period, to reissue those permits by the end of 2022. So the work is ongoing there, just like it is in Oregon. The next state I wanted to touch on is Idaho, where I'm located. And EPA, as of this summer, is no longer the NPDS permitting authority for Idaho, but when we issued the Idaho NPDS Cafo general permit a couple springs ago, we still were the permitting authority. And right after we issued that permit in May, we received a petition for review brought by Food and Water Watch and the Snake River Waterkeeper. And they were challenging the NPDS general permit for CAFOs in Idaho. And very generally, the issues before the Ninth Circuit Court was whether the monitoring provisions in the permit were adequate to ensure that the permit conditions and effluent limitations were met. So oral arguments were this spring on that, and the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals filed their decision on September 16th of last September, 2021. And I'm just going to read verbatim some of the court's language here regarding the decision, just so I don't mess it up. But the court agreed with the petitioner's contentions that the permit lacks sufficient monitoring provisions to ensure compliance with the permit's, quote, zero discharge requirements for both the production and land application areas, and therefore was arbitrary, capricious, and abuse of discretion and not in accordance with the law. The court held that the permit had no monitoring provisions for underground discharges from production areas. Without a requirement that CAFOs monitor waste containment structures for underground discharges, there is no way to ensure that the production areas comply with the permit's zero discharge requirement. Concerning the land application areas, the court held that the Idaho permit flatly prohibited discharges from land application areas during dry weather. The permit, however, had no monitoring provisions for dry weather discharges from land application areas, even though the record before the EPA showed that such discharges can occur during irrigation on fertilized CAFO fields. Without a requirement to monitor runoff from irrigated CAFO fields, there's no way to ensure that a CAFO is compliant with the permit's dry weather no discharge requirement for land application areas. And I think the most significant thing here is that the court granted the petition and vacated the permit. And when they vacate a permit, the permit no longer exists. And so we're working with the state of Idaho and with the Department of Justice to kind of determine the next steps on or what further action is warranted following this decision. So it's a fairly significant decision. I think I just want to touch on next. It's been kind of in the background for a while, but it's the National Air Emissions Monitoring Study. So just some background here, and under a 2005 air compliance agreement with the animal production area industry, EPA is responsible for using data under the National Air Emissions Monitoring Study to develop emission models for ammonia, hydrogen sulfide, particulate matter, and volatile organic compounds, VOCs, at animal feeding operations raising swine, chickens, egg-laying operations, and dairies. On the 18th of August, EPA published draft air emission models for poultry operations. And again, that was developed using data gathered during the National Air Emissions Monitoring Study. So these emission models are going to be draft emission models are going to be coming out on a kind of a rolling basis here. And so after the draft emission models for all animal sectors, again, swine, broilers, chickens, egg laying operations, dairies, after those are all complete, EPA is going to public notice the entire set of draft models for public comment. And so the agency plans to release draft emission models for, this is the most significant for our region, the EPA plans to release draft emission models for dairy animal feeding operations and VOC emissions from all animal sectors on a rolling basis between now and the summer of 2022. So we'll have to keep our eye out on those things as they come out in the next year or so. Just two more updates, Wim, and then I'll be done here. I just wanted to mention that headquarters has a national ag counselor to the administrator, just like I'm the ag advisor to our regional administrator here in Region 10. But that is a political position that's been vacant for some time. We also have a career staffer in that office that's been vacant for a while. And so in the last month, EPA has hired on a new career team lead in the ag counselor's office. Her name is Venus Welch White, and she was hired in mid-September. Actually, her first day was on September 12th, and I think I met her for the first time 2 weeks ago. And so some of her background, she's worked at USDA for more than 6 years in several different positions. She also worked at the Office of Management and Budget as an EPA examiner, and she's got pretty impressive credentials. She's a Presidential Management Fellow in STEM and possesses a PhD, master's degree, and Bachelor of Science degree in Integrative Biosciences and Biology from Tuskegee University. And I've had the privilege to talk to her several times. I think she's going to be a great addition to the agency. The second thing that happened is on Tuesday of this week, we actually heard, or met actually, the new ag counselor to the administrator, who's a political appointee for EPA. And his name is Rod Snyder, and he joined the agency on Tuesday. And he used to be the president of a organization called Field to Market. And this, I'm going to read this just because it's pretty long. Field to Market, the Alliance for Sustainable Agriculture, the largest multi-stakeholder initiative working to advance the sustainability of commodity crop farming in the United States. So he was the president of that organization prior to coming to EPA. He's also worked for the National Corn Growers Association and CropLife America. And he resides in Shenandoah Junction, West Virginia. So he's a West Virginia guy, but he just came on board on Tuesday and is going to be setting up some time with all the regional ag advisors to chat with us about our regional issues. And so hopefully I'll be able to get him out to the region as well to visit with people. And I think I'm going to stop there, Wim, and see if anyone has any questions or if you want me to talk about anything else.
Yeah, I'll open the floor to questions for Nick. All right, well, not hearing anything. Thanks so much, Nick, and we'll look forward to those, especially the names, air emission study stuff coming out.
Absolutely.
That'll be interesting for our region for sure.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Thanks, Wim.
All right, thank you, Nick. Take care. All right, any of the other partner agencies that have updates for us? And I'll just let you jump in and take off. Just introduce yourself and provide an update. All right, second call, anyone from USDA, DEQ, Oregon USDA folks, soil water districts. I suppose we should add OWEB to our list and invite OWEB folks, which I've not done. All right, not hearing anything. One last call, third call for any updates from agencies? All right, then we'll move to the public comment time. So if anybody'd like to provide public comment for us, please state your name and you can go ahead and go.
Hey, Wim, this is Nick. I don't want to make a public comment, but I did forget to mention something in my updates. Is it okay if I say something?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, we all know that waters of the U.S. has been front and center for quite some time now, and there's an effort going on to rewrite some of those rules. But what I just wanted to bring attention to is there was a press release that came out today for regional stakeholder one-on-one person, well, not one-on-one, one-on group meetings. And I don't have the press release in front of me right now, but if you Google or if you do epa.gov/WOTUS, the press release is right there, and it's an actual Federal Register notice seeking self-nominations to be part of these, I'll call them listening sessions, but there's going to be several listening sessions in each region, and Idaho and Oregon and Washington are all in the western region, of course. And the Federal Register notice talks about individuals self-nominating themselves to be part of this group to work with EPA to provide feedback on WOTUS. And so I can pass that information on to you after this if you'd like to send it out to your folks.
Yeah, it would be great, Nick. We'll definitely share it with our group.
I would like to make a comment, or maybe more like a question, if we have time.
Sure.
Thank you. So in regard to the new administrative processes that you updated us on, and specifically coordination with other agencies that Stephanie Page was speaking about, like the example that was given was a facility in a wetland area that would be an issue with ODFW's requirements. I think I heard that right. And that the idea is that ODA is trying to make sure that these facilities have gotten all their other permits and authorizations before proposing a permit to the public. So it sounds like you were saying that you're doing that now, and I'm a little confused because with the JS Ranch permit that has this current comment period that's ongoing, it doesn't appear to us that a lot of those other authorizations have happened, and specifically also that it is in a potential wetland area. So I'm just wondering, is this a process that will be started at some point, or is there a reason why that permit kind of slipped through the cracks in this new process? Because I would like to say I support this new process. On behalf of Center for Food Safety, I think it's very important to make sure that these operations have gotten all their other authorizations, things like water rights, et cetera, before these permits are even considered to be issued. So, I guess my comment and question is, what's up with JS Ranch?
Sure, I can respond to that, Amy. So hopefully I said it this way during my remarks, but if not, I'll amend and correct what I said. We want to make sure before we go to public notice with a proposed facility, and I think JS Ranch is a good example, that they have applied for the other types of authorizations that they need. And so we did work with the facility to make sure that they had done that. They don't need to be secured before we go to public notice, but they need to be applied for. And so that's what we made sure that they had done.
And does that include wetlands?
It does, either that the design of the facility is not going to impact wetlands and need a permit, or that if it does, that those permits have been applied for.
Yeah, the comment that I would add on specifically for JS, so the wetland issue there is a removal fill issue that's governed by Department of State Lands, and so that applicant has applied to Department of State Lands and has received review from DSL on the wetland issue there, and I think they're just awaiting for the final written outcome from state land. So they're well into the wetland fill removal process for that site.
Thanks for clarifying that.
All right, back to public comment. Anybody else would like to make public comment? All right, not hearing that, we'll move to our next to the last item about industry updates. So anybody from the industry, OSU Extension, any industry folks out there have comments on what's going on? one thing I would encourage folks to think of as this will be our last meeting for this year, for calendar year 2021. I'm hoping in 22 we'll be back in person for meetings, but I'd also throw out the challenge for everybody to think about agenda topics. And if we think we have things on the agenda that aren't helpful, we can move those off the agenda. So there's some things that have been on here kind of long standing, and replace those with other things. So I would throw the door open for anybody to suggest agenda topics or agenda modification moving into next year and beyond. All right, last call for industry updates. I guess I will provide one, and that's in the role that I play as a manager of our fertilizer program. The industry trade information that we get through that program has basically talked about a pretty high escalation on prices for most of the fertilizing materials that we register in the state. And today a report came out where they're looking at possibly setting records in late 2021 or early 22 for some of the nitrogen and phosphorus products. So the phosphorus is mined material and the nitrogen is synthetic nitrogen that has a basis in natural gas. So one thing we've noticed in that fertilizer program is that we part of our revenue source is a tonnage assessment. And so when fertilizer hits record prices, the tonnage sales in the state definitely go down. So there maybe is a negative impact there or inverse impact there. But what that does for the Cafo world is it makes nutrients in manure and manure compost more valuable. And manure compost are also able to be organically certified. So it changes the financial considerations in that dynamic. And there's already been a fair amount of projects coming to our doorstep on the Cafo side where people are looking to try to turn some of their materials into fertilizer to move it off their farms and into this other market that's experiencing a high economic cycle right now. So just wanted to throw that out there, and people are being creative about how they're doing that. So. All right, not hearing anybody else raising their hand. Let's look in the chat box real quick, see if there's anything hanging out there. I think we're good. All right, well, thank you all for participating, and I hope you have a great rest of the year. We'll look forward to starting again in April of 2021. Thank you all.
Thanks, Wim.